Hello, my name's Haraldson. I'm here with my daughter Gretchen, and we just thought we would take a little tour of Rock Run Church and Cemetery, where our family first came and where the first church that they attended was. And many of our relatives are buried here, so we thought we'd visit a few graves and talk a little bit about the people who are here. First though, come through the gate to where the church was. Both churches, the one that was built in the 1840s made of stone and the one in the 1870s made of wood that burned down in the 1920s. So the church was here and they started burying people in the 1840s. And I think maybe a good place to start would be with the first Norwegian that ever came to Rock Run, Clement Stabæk. We're here at the grave of the first Norwegian to settle in Rock Run, Clement Stabæk. He and his wife, Livy, bought land on the Rock Run Creek, and eventually they bought their 400 acres here just to the south of Durand Road. That land all through there, where the railroad tracks run, was all part of his estate. The land that we're on here, I'll just mention, was owned by his stepbrother, Christopher Haraldson, and he's buried here too, and hopefully we'll find his grave. But he made this land available to the church, which became the Norwegian Evangelical Church, or commonly called the Rock Run Norwegian Church. What we have here is the gravestone then of Clement, who was born in 1801 and died in 1881, age 80. He and his wife Livy came to this country on their honeymoon back in 1839. And once here, they set out on their own to find this settlement. I see here they've got a son buried here too, Helver, but this represents the first of the Norwegians that settled in this area. I think the bravest of all the Norwegians that are buried here is probably Annika Nelson, who also was Anniken Stabæk, also Annika Knudsen Nelson. And she came to this country in 1842 with her son Thurston, who is buried over here, and with 3 other Nelson sons of hers. On the way over, she had a 1-year-old daughter die of cholera, and she was buried at sea in the Atlantic. When they made the trip over Lake Michigan, her husband Ole, her second husband Ole, died, and they brought him and buried him in Milwaukee. And then her and her 17-year-old Thurston and 12-year-old, 10-year-old, and 8-year-old Nelson sons made their way here to Rock Run, where she put in a claim for 160 acres. She had to improve it. At the time, it hadn't been surveyed, and it was impossible for anyone here to buy from the government. It hadn't been established, so they were simply squatting on it, I guess, for another year until they could purchase it, which she did. Thurston Knudsen was among a group of young boys, men in Rock Run, who decided to get involved in the California gold rush. And approximately 8 of them went out there. A story full of Indians and ox and riots and Panamanian revolutions and all kinds of stuff. Anyway, worthy of a movie. Perhaps we'll talk about that another time. The name of Hellick and Harry Knudsen. Hellick was the nephew of Clement Stabæk, and he came on the boat in 1839 with Clement at age 17 at the urging of his mother Anniken Nelson, who we just visited earlier. They had several children who were of note to the Haraldsons. Up here we have Carrie, who died of cancer as a young woman, but was very friendly and very smart and well thought of. Next to her is her older sister, Ann Knudsen. She never married, nurse and served with several doctors. She was very smart, very loving, and she had a tremendous amount of energy. She was considered by the Haraldson kids their second mom. Down here, favorite uncle, Uncle Oscar. And Uncle Oscar was very well to do. He invested wisely. He was a banker in town. He was involved with that. He also owned a lot of land. He owned land in Alberta and Saskatchewan, which the Haraldson boys went and farmed for him back at the turn of the 1900s. Also, he liked to help all the Haraldsons go to school, so he gave a lot of money to them as they tried to go to college. The other thing that he liked to do is help them get around, because he always had the fanciest car, and so he was good for transportation for all the Haraldsons as well. And so here we are at the Haraldson graves. We're starting here with the first Haraldson in America, Thor, who came as a 17-year-old to live with his uncle Thor Sigurdsson here in Davis. And next to him, his wife, Alice Knudsen Haraldson, who was living at home when the hired hand Thor proposed marriage to her, which she accepted. They got married in 1882. One of their children is buried here with them, Carl, who died tragically of an appendicitis burst when he was just 21 years old. At the time, he was studying to be a Lutheran minister at Luther College in Decorah, Iowa. Down here, another tragic tale. One of Thor and Alice's boys, Elmer Haraldson, and his wife, Myrtle Cross Haraldson. They went up into Canada primarily to farm for Uncle Oscar Knudsen first in Alberta. Then he stopped that and he went up to work in the gold fields in the Yukon, and he ran a boat on the river between Skagway and Whitehorse. Came back, started working on Oscar Knudsen's farm in Saskatchewan, and eventually he took over the farm that his brother Harold Haraldson had started in 1907. That was 1913. They had 4 daughters, and tragically they were made orphans by a boating accident in 1929. Alice was Martin Theodore Haraldson, Marty, and these two were probably the best looking couple in the whole town of Davis at the time. Beautiful, beautiful, handsome people. Marty was a farmer. He farmed on Thor's farm after Thor retired. He also farmed on Uncle Oscar's farm after Uncle Oscar died. He was involved in estate planning and settling estates for both Thor and Uncle Oscar. He died tragically in 1940, falling off the second-story balcony at Uncle Oscar's house, where he and his family were living at the time. Louise, his wife, was also very accomplished, but 1940 was a tough year for her. She lost her husband, then the house they were living in burned to the ground, and a couple months later she had her second daughter. And so they eventually all ended up living above the cheese factory with her mother until things got settled, and then she was able to build a house on Epley Street in Davis where her and the girls moved in. We're here in another section of the Rock Run Cemetery where we're seeing some more of the Haraldson graves. Harold Haraldson was the son of Thor Haraldson and Alice Knudsen, and he was the oldest. He also happens to be my grandfather. He had an interesting life. He first tried to be a motorman for a trolley in Rockford. That didn't seem to be his calling, and he ended up coming back to farming. And in 1907, he went up to Canada to try his hand at homesteading and farming some land that his father Thor had bought. He was up there 7 years. He had come home in 1912 and got married to May Anderson, Haraldson, from the Andersons. And they went right back to Canada. They had a baby son, Glenn, in 1913, and she decided to come back here to Davis with him at that time. Towards the end of the year, Harold gave his interest in the farm to his brother Elmer, and he came back and bought a farm just over the border, and on, let's see, that was Hopkins Road, 160 acres there, just over the Illinois-Wisconsin border. So, as I said, Glenn Haraldson was born. He was in the World War, as it says there, World War II. When he got out, he tried his hand at several different enterprises. He seemed to always end up back at the farm. He was always well read. Later in life, you could find him almost every day at the Janesville Library with his head in a book. Uncle Glenn. Curtis Haraldson and his wife Gloria ended up taking over the farm from their father Harold, and they raised 4 kids. He farmed on a farm adjacent to his brother Paul, who was my dad. And together they farmed these 2 farms. And as far as I could tell, they got together most days, had coffee, talked about what they were going to do together. And they seemingly got along really well. Curtis also served in World War II. He was a scout out in front of the troops, out in front of the front lines, helping to call in artillery positions, and was very distinguished and had a lot of awards in the war. Came home, married Gloria. They were very fun people, very friendly, very social, easy to laugh, easy to get along with. We have next a recent addition to the cemetery, my dad Paul Haraldson, brother of Curtis, and his father, of course, was Harold W. Haraldson. He and his sister Pauline were born on the table in the kitchen at their farm in the middle of the winter. To keep the babies warm, they opened the door to the oven and set them there. They grew up and were the center of attention, as they both were very cute. As they got older, they still were pretty cute, but they graduated high school, and he ended up farming during World War II as his brothers were in the service, but he didn't get out of serving his time in the service during the Korean War. He was drafted at age 26. He then came out and was able to farm the adjoining farm that his father had purchased to the original farm, and eventually he was able to own that. He, besides me, he had 2 other children. He was married to a wonderful woman, Carol, who is still with us. I think what's going to happen here is that both her and I are probably going to be the last 2 Haraldsons buried in this cemetery. But that's just a matter of the fact that no Haraldsons live in this area anymore. And that, I think, kind of concludes our little visit here to the cemetery. I guess the overall thing that I'd like you to know is, you know, there's a lot of history here, and you ever wonder, you know, where we came from or why we were the way we are. It's because of these people who set the stage and also kind of delivered the kind of people that they raised that's also raised us. So, hope you enjoyed this part.